Hello, we are In Conversation, a podcast from the School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University, designed to showcase timely and informative insights from leading faculty, researchers, and other experts, which impact the ever-changing social world we live in. Here at the School of Social and Family Dynamics, we recognize that the lands where we are hosting this conversation at Arizona State University belong to the Maricopa and Pima peoples, and we are privileged that we can welcome you to today's conversation.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Aubrey Hoffer, and I'm your graduate student host of In Conversation with the School of Social and Family Dynamics. My magnificent guest today is Dr. Michelle Pasco. After getting her bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in Asian American studies from UCLA, she joined us at ASU to obtain her master's and PhD in family and human development. We liked her so much that we decided to offer her a position as a postdoctoral research scholar. Her work centers around using a mixed methods approach to understand the lived experiences of youth of color within neighborhood context. Her work has far-reaching policy implications and represents a really fascinating intersection between sociology and, quite frankly, political science. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michelle, the podcast tends to start and end the same way. I'm going to ask you three kind of rapid fire questions. And the point is to just try to answer them off the cuff. These first ones will just be sort of light and easy. And then the last ones will get quick bites of your personal philosophy. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. So my first question is, have you ever had a nickname?
Some people call me Mishy. So just like a play off my name, but that was basically it.
I love that. Okay, my second question is, what is your go-to meal when going out to eat?
I probably would say chicken wings.
I love chicken wings. Where's your favorite place to get chicken wings?
I think for a fast food place, Wingstop for sure.
I love Wingstop. My boyfriend is obsessed with Thigh Stop, so we were hitting that up all the time when they had that promotion.
I haven't had Thigh Stop. I thought it was a joke when I saw it, and I was like, "Oh wait, it's for real."
Yeah. All right. My third question is, who is one person, real or fake, dead or alive, no limitations, who you would love to have a conversation with?
I always have trouble with this question, because I always think Oprah, and I'm like, why Oprah though? But I think I love her interviewing skills, and so I would I think that's why I would want to be interviewed by her, but then also learn how to interview like her. So that's why.
I love that answer. And when I was starting to prep doing the podcast stuff, I started to listen to Oprah's Super Soul conversations every day. So I am in no way as trying to say that I'm similar to Oprah, but I have tried so hard to copy some of the things that I learned from just listening to her for hours at a time. So I love that answer. So let's get into the conversation now. So much of your work focuses on neighborhood context, but that made me really curious. Will you tell me a little bit about the neighborhood that you grew up in and what started your interest in understanding development through the lens of the neighborhood?
Yeah, I get this question a lot because, as it's I study neighborhoods. So what made me interested in neighborhoods? So I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles and in this town called Azusa. And so I grew up in a actually predominantly Latinx neighborhood. And so I didn't really think anything of it growing up. It was, the only difference was that, I was one of the few Filipinos that lived in, that neighborhood in that city. I had my group of family friends who were Filipino, but all my friends were Mexican, and I just grew up in that culture because there's actually a lot of similarities between Filipino culture and Latinx culture. So I felt I was I guess like different in some ways, but then there was also a lot of similarities that I felt like really comfortable. And so usually like when people ask me like, why do you study Latinx neighborhoods? I was like, well, I grew up in one. And so, and then so when I started doing research and when I was at UCLA, I was a part of this research project that was studying the everyday lives of Mexican American families. And I was like so fascinated by it, but because I was like, wait, these youth are like growing up the same way I did, or there were like similar things I could relate to. And I didn't know that I could do research on like myself. Like, so I thought that was really interesting. And so I wanted to continue that work. And when I got to ASU, my advisor, Rebecca White, was, focusing a lot on neighborhoods. And I was really interested on incorporated contextual component to my research. And so I started focusing on the different ways that I could study neighborhoods. Like I studied them quantitatively and then qualitatively. And so, and in both ways, like using both methods. And so I think that's kind of how it came all about.
That is so cool. There is so much to unpack with this. And I guess I'll just start with the first thing that sort of, I don't know, really came to my mind as you were talking. And so it's really interesting that you talk about the sort of similarities between Filipino culture and like Latinx culture. I'm very familiar with this because my partner is Filipino, and there's actually an incredible book that I've purchased, read a little bit of. I've had to set it aside, but it's called The Latinos of Asia by Anthony Ocampo. And it's so fascinating to hear about how he sort of deconstructs this idea of like just race in general, which is just really cool. So I think it's really fascinating that you're approaching these issues of, race within the neighborhood context, because so much of how we think about race is contextual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think, growing up, I was always like, okay, like, I think I focused a lot on like the deficits in which like, in the neighborhood I was living in, I was like, oh, like I grew up in like in a neighborhood where like I saw graffiti and I saw trash in like areas, and it was like, that was like a normal thing. And I think my parents were also like super like protective over me, and so I think I was very sheltered in that way. And so I think I might have also like heightened like, oh, like, maybe my neighborhood isn't super safe because my parents are also super protective. But that's also like a thing about Filipino parents with their Filipino daughters. They tend to be super overprotective.
Yeah, my boyfriend has a sister, so I'm quite familiar with that as well. And I mean, it's fascinating for me to see, kind of as a white person who just grew up in a different cultural context, to just see sort of the differences in the family dynamics and the similarities too. But yeah, I just have such an admiration for this work that really examines just kind of race in these really interesting contexts. And one thing I wanted to talk about was your most recent publication, where you were talking about the relation between sort of parental perception of neighborhood, social and cultural cohesion, and parents' cultural socialization on their children's kind of ethnic racial identity. So that is kind of, I just said a lot of words that probably people who are listening are like, what is all of this? So let's just start by talking about that project, but kind of defining those constructs first. So can you talk about what is neighborhood, social and cultural cohesion, and how did you think that it would relate to these other variables in this study?
Yeah. I love the study so much because I was able to add this cultural perspective to what is normally a very mainstream neighborhood construct. So there's been a lot of work on just neighborhood social cohesion, which is this idea where having neighbors who share mutual values and trust one another is an important goal to have in neighborhoods, because like there's it's associated with a lot of better outcomes among youth and also adults, because you have neighbors that you can rely on, and you can rely on neighbors to help out if you need to. And so there is this, so adding this cultural perspective to it, so neighborhood social and cultural cohesion is this added part where you have neighbors who support and participate in Mexican culture, at least in this particular study that we focused on Mexican origin youth and families. And so when I was delving into this, into neighborhood social and cultural cohesion, I was like, this could be a resource to parents. Like, we think about a lot of cultural resources and symbols that are more like physical, that like exist, but this idea where it's like, you can go, you can have neighbors who, you speak the same language, and knowing that you kind of have like those shared values, and even people who aren't, you might have neighbors who aren't Mexican, but who appreciate it, and, and are open to like talking about it and going to like different cultural events with you, would be really helpful for parents to engage in cultural socialization. So, ways in which parents teach their children about their ethnic racial backgrounds. So it's like, parents already have this like idea of their, like, these are the cultural values and practices I want to pass down, but to have that extra layer of support would like then like support them like even more so.
Right. And I would imagine that would probably be, extra influential for instance, like children who are first generation and, their parents have immigrated to the country, and just, adding that extra layer of support within the context of the neighborhood would probably be so fundamental.
Definitely. Yeah. Having not only your parents to go to when you're, exploring your like ethnic racial identity, but also having other people that you can have to talk about this with, or to guide you in any sort of way, is also instrumental in that aspect.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about kind of neighborhood connectedness in general, because I feel like for me growing up in, largely suburban environments, I did not know who my neighbors were at all. And I think that that's been the case that a lot of people who grew up similarly to me have experienced. And, there's probably a lot of reasons behind that. I think some people might say, well, we're starting to live in this digital age where, we're having more connections virtually. We're not really going out and meeting our neighbors when we move in anymore. But that might not be painting the full picture. But that's also why I think your work is so interesting, because really what you see is that no, there is connection in neighborhoods, and that connection is so important to foster.
Even like just knowing that it exists, like if you do need it, like it's there. And so right. Even if you don't know your neighbors, like I think there's like having that idea, it's like, if I do, know somebody, even if it's not like literally like right across the street, but like, the next block over or something. I think that's really important.
Well, or just knowing that like the people in your community view you as a person, view you as, someone who is worthy of, respect and love, because there are times where you are in a neighborhood and there are maybe things on people's doors or porches that do not imply that they feel that way about you. And that can be an incredibly isolating experience.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I'm really interested in this this component of like knowing what kind of sociocultural symbols and resources exist in neighborhoods. In some of my work, I'm really finding it in like the more business areas, but more and more I think things are existing in residential areas. Some may be more overt or covert, but I think, people are putting up signs that can show like, it's like what, like that can signal this sense of belonging or feeling more of an outsider.
Right. So going back to that paper, so one of the implications that I thought was so important in that paper was, about how important neighborhood resources and community are specifically for Latinx parents and children. And that brings up the question of how do we, and I'm sort of thinking of we at the policy level, but we can also think of we at the individual level. So how do we make cultural resources more accessible to Latinx residents? I'm trying to think like big picture, like how do we, develop this?
Yeah, that's the question I think about all the time, like, especially in my work. I think one of it is, partnerships with neighborhood organizations, like, people who are embedded in the community. They know like people who live in the neighborhood and then and the things that they support, and they want the best. And so either it's academia partners with neighborhood organizations. I think there's this, and I haven't included schools in my work as much, but this intersection between neighborhood and school, where I think would be really valuable in terms of, how to inform parents and children about neighborhood resources. I think there was one partnership we had when I was doing data collection with Rebecca, where we had partnered with the Guadalupe Branch Library, and they had so many different events and things that were going on in the community. And so I thought that was really instrumental, because in Guadalupe, they had a really great way of like preserving the different cultural aspects in that city. And so I think that the library was instrumental in that.
Yeah.
And so I think those sorts of things. And I think about, having, making sure that when you do have like resources and events that are going on in the neighborhood, making them accessible, like what the number one thing is through first language, like making sure you are, not only advertising or making materials available in English, but also like, for example, in Spanish. And so I think that is also like a key thing, showing that, well, like, we want to make people feel welcome. And one of the first ways is to making sure like, things are translational.
Right. And I think that that's so important because, I think there is this idea that like there is no community anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there is this perception that, we're all just in our own isolated bubbles. We just sort of talk to who we want to talk to, but there isn't this like greater community. But really there is. And it's just so important that those who want to, well, first of all, those who want to participate in the community are knowledgeable that these are, the resources available to them, but also that those resources themselves are inclusive of the members of the community.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of your work as a postdoc, where you've been working a lot in the Arizona Youth Identity Project. I was hoping that you could tell me a little bit about this project, sort of what your role has been and kind of the things that you've learned from working on it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Working on the Arizona Youth Identity Project has been an amazing experience. I've learned so much. So the Arizona Youth Identity Project is a large mixed method study. So it includes it's about to be 2 waves of survey data, 3 waves of qualitative interviews. So the interviews, we conducted one pre-2020 election, and then post-2020 election. And then the third wave was 100 days after the inauguration. And then the third thing is we have a Photovoice component to it as well. And so broadly, the project examines how young adults define what it means to be American, and how that shapes their sense of belonging and identity. And then we also examine what motivates young adults to engage civically and politically. So I was brought on to the project because I've done mixed methods work. And one other thing that I'd love to mention about this project is that we conducted interviews and Photovoice and surveys with adults across all of Arizona. So it's Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, Flagstaff, and Show Low. And so we really wanted to get like, not only in like the Phoenix metro area, but like all of Arizona. And so I think we got these interesting perspectives of like, some like in terms of young adults, like liberal young adults and also like conservative young adults. So I've had my hand in every single part of the research project. And so I think, the research project was also, we built a class around the research project as well, where we trained and taught undergraduate and graduate students how to conduct qualitative interviews. And so we put them out into the field and they collected these interviews for us. And this was in the fall 2020 semester. And in the spring, we also had a class where then we taught many of these students were returning students and some new how to code and analyze these interviews. And then now I'm actually leading a smaller course in it's an advanced writing course where now, since we have the data ready for like some reanalysis, now we're writing papers. And I'm also doing in the class, I'm also showing them some advanced tools on Deduce, which is the qualitative platform that we're using, and also some mixed methods designs. So
that is so cool.
Much.
That is just, that is so impressive that you have taken on so much. Like, that is just absolutely mind blowing. And I love that you take a mixed method approach, because for me, I've largely worked quantitatively and I'm at the very beginning stages of trying to tiptoe into some qualitative work. And it is just so different. I love many things about it. I am confused by many things about it, which is just the nature of the beast. And, but it really is only through a mixed method approach that we're able to capture the full picture of, these constructs that we're working with. So I think that's incredible that not only do you have that knowledge, but you're also training not just graduate students, but undergraduate students with that knowledge.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really great to be able to be in a project where it's like we have all this data to work with and we can combine them in so many different ways.
So you mentioned that you have done Photovoice methods. What are those exactly?
Yeah, and so I've worked with photo elicitation and Photovoice. They're very similar. So when in this particular project, Photovoice is, it's a methodology in which you can engage, especially youth and young adults, to take photos and create and share their own narrative and experiences about different concepts that essentially the researcher is interested in, but then the Photovoice allows them to kind of take control of that narrative, because then they're sending their pictures and describing their experiences. And so in the Photovoice project, in the Arizona Youth Identity Project, we had the participants send them daily messages for 14 days. So they were all like different prompts. And we would ask them to send like at least one picture and then describe what the picture, like a short description of the picture. So like, for example, one of the questions we asked them was, what does discrimination look like? And so they would send us one or more pictures and then a brief description of that. And so there's two ways of analyzing this now, through either the photos that they sent us and also the short descriptions too.
That is so fascinating. And I think that's really intriguing, because the photo element really captures a more abstract way of thinking about these concepts than if you were just doing, for instance, just a person-to-person interview.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see the like the variety of photos that they send. And also like across participants too. I remember this question that I was looking at, and specifically because I had put together a conference presentation on it. We had a lot of participants send like a Google stock photo of like, if you Google discrimination, and I was so interested in like, okay, like, what, like some people would send that, but then other people would send like, things that they saw in their neighborhood. And so I think seeing the variety just like within participants, but across them too, was really interesting.
So one thing that I think is so interesting with your work is these really policy-oriented implications. I mean, I might just be projecting like a kind of like political science thing onto your work, but is that how you've interpreted your own work yourself?
I do think about the policy implications that, especially like with my work on neighborhoods that I do, and what this could, I think one of the things that I would love to delve into next is like environmental racism. I think that's, they're like the adolescents know that they are perceptive to like the differences that they see in their own neighborhoods compared to like wealthy neighborhoods. And so, like this exists at a systemic level, like, more well-off neighborhoods get their streets like fixed right away. They have more sidewalks, they have more trees. And I think, and adolescents are very aware of this. And so I think that's like one of the next things I like would love to like delve into, like, what sorts of, environmental, like these systemic things that exist in the neighborhood that adolescents are, that they're aware of. And so I do think of this in like this neighborhood level, where even like how zoning exists. And now like when I think about all the different things that have come up with like voting and stuff. And so I think like, like neighborhoods have implications for, like ways in which people have access to voting and stuff.
Right. That was something that I was thinking about as I was reading your work was, particularly with like zoning and the sort of environmental discrimination and, sort of people being pushed out of certain neighborhoods, but also people being forced into certain neighborhoods. And I can imagine too, at like the youth and adolescent level, you're cognizant of that because there's also probably a large chance that you may be going to school with these other kids, or you may be being sort of pushed into these other school districts. And there's like so many like multifaceted layers of this that I just think it's really interesting to think about how being in some of these heavily zoned areas would influence the way you think about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we also think about like how, like, distance wise, like how easily accessible is a grocery store, or, I think when I think about some of in the interviews I conducted with these adolescents, like, they were talking about, like there was a community center, but like there was like a water fountain that was like never fixed, or they have like bus stops, but like some of them wouldn't have shade. And, like in Arizona, like shade is like a huge thing. And being able to, access like how far, like libraries, because some adolescents, like that's where they go to access Wi-Fi, and even to just like, if they want like air conditioning, like these things are, things that they, that they know about, and like where they can like access them. And so I think the next part is like, how to make these institutional resources in the sense more accessible to adolescents and like in their neighborhoods. Because, in a lot of neighborhood work, they talk about like food deserts, where it's like really like it's hard to access like grocery stores, but there's like fast food places on like every single corner of the neighborhood. And so I think this is also relevant for different social, like these social institutions, so like libraries, community centers, and stuff like that.
Right. That makes me think a little bit about my work in body image, where there really has not been very much work exploring sort of the relation between like socioeconomic status and body image, which I think is a really big disservice because we know that, people who typically are lower socioeconomic status, there's less access to, healthy food. And there is this, link between obesity and lower socioeconomic status, yet the link between that and body image has really not been explored in depth. And it just makes me think about the ways that, all of this intersects, right, with like poverty and zoning and, food scarcity. And in a way, it feels, I don't know. I don't want to say it feels like just like, where do you even begin to solve these problems? But it really makes you think about how interconnected all of these issues are to each other. And really that, it's not as simple as if we fix X, everything will suddenly, be better.
Yeah, no, it's all related in these different ways. And so, and especially I think in, in neighborhoods that are ethnically and racially concentrated, a lot of research and all, like even like policy really focuses on like the deficits that come out of these neighborhoods. And, like I was saying before, like growing up, I focused on like the deficits of like what I was lacking from my neighborhoods and, or like my neighborhoods and schools that, when I went into college, like I didn't feel like I was like fully prepared. And so sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, like so I think, yeah, like I think part of this is why like what motivates my work is to focus on like these promoting aspects. Because like despite like, all these like costs that is associated with these neighborhoods are also promoting aspects that promote like healthy adolescent development and make youth successful. And that's part of it is through the community and through the like parents adapting to these situations. But we can do more for these communities and these neighborhoods where parents don't always have to and youth don't always have to adapt to the conditions as is. Yeah.
Right. Like the deficit is not with the families at all. The deficit is with, resources that should be there for them because they are there for, other families. And I think talking about strengths, it's so important to acknowledge that, the strength of these communities and the, just that sense of belongingness is so beneficial to youth that, I don't think that white youth always get that. And I'm not saying like, oh my God, white people are oppressed. Do not interpret it in that way. What I'm saying is that there is a strength in these communities of color with, this sort of shared cultural experience and having these connections, knowing your neighbors, having these shared cultural values that are such a strength to these students that, just other youth with more privilege, they just don't get that because it's just not as, I don't want to say not as important, but there's just not that emphasis that there is.
Yeah. And I think, part of the research that is done with these neighborhoods that are more ethnically and racially concentrated is that, they say it's harder to create these ties and mutual trust with your neighbors because, there is this aspect of, in order to create these mutual ties and trust, like it takes time. And sometimes like, if there's a high residential mobility where people are moving in and out of their neighborhoods because they can't afford their rent or they're being pushed out, then it's hard to create that trust, especially if you're moving like every few years and then having to create that all over again. And so it's like, how can we, I think that's why where policy and these neighborhood organizations come in to like, although like, there might be high residential mobility in a neighborhood, how can we still like help people feel welcomed and like they belong and, those mutual ties and trust in that way.
Right. And I think that is what is so wonderful about your work, because oftentimes in academia, there is a tendency to put out papers for other academics to read, and it doesn't necessarily trickle down to the people who we want it to actually impact. But your work is so important because even at the data collection stage, you are making connections within the community and doing the work that academics really owe to not just the community, but to the world.
Yeah, I'm hoping, I would love to be more embedded in the community, and I'm hoping once I'm in my faculty position, like I can definitely create those partnerships and ties.
Yeah, and I have no doubt after talking to you that you will most certainly be able to do that. So I wanted to sort of transition now to our deep questions to end on. This is one of my favorite parts of the episode because it really gives us a chance just to sort of hear a little bit about your personal philosophy. So are you ready for some deep cuts?
Yes, I am.
All right. So my first question, Michelle, is what was the best advice you got while you were in grad school?
I had a couple pieces of advice that were really helpful. I think the most recent one, and I think this is relevant to all students, is whether it's dissertation or master's thesis, was a done dissertation is better than a perfect dissertation. Because even one of my dissertations has already been published. There was edits that had gone on afterwards, but I think we as grad students, we strive for perfection, and sometimes it's like you just need to be done. And so I think that was like one of the, especially when I was in my last year just dissertating, that was really helpful. I think the other one was and I think we talk a lot about this, but I think later in grad school I was a lot better at this, but having like that work-life balance. And that and this actually came from someone who wasn't in grad school, but he was just like, your career isn't always like everything. It's not, you're always going to be your entire life. And I think that kind of stuck with me, where it's like, I want to, I think grad students should always make sure to make some time for themselves, even during the weekend, and have like a stop time in terms of work, because burnout is real. And I think that's like the nature of academia, where there's this flexibility, but you can keep working and working. But I think making time to do things for yourself is super important. And so I think that when he like told me that, I was like, you're right, like I should be more mindful about like taking time and having like a better work-life balance. Because I remember when I started grad school, I was like, oh, I need to work so much so that I could keep up with everything, because I think I was coming in feeling like I was like at a disadvantage and stuff. So to make up for that, I needed to work even harder. But that's not always the case.
I think that you've spoken to a universal experience. So I appreciate you sharing that, because it definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, definitely.
So my second question is, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for many things. I think one of the things, since we're in the topic of thinking about grad school, was having such a supportive group of friends during grad school. I was when I would go to these meetings with the William T. Grant Foundation, so I was interacting with different graduate students from other schools, and hearing about their experience. And I was like, oh, I'm so lucky to be where I was, where I had supportive friends, where we weren't competing with one another. we're still like supporting, like, we were like supporting each other's work and each other's accomplishments. Like in my lab, we would always like celebrate one another, where it's like, if someone like published a paper, it was like, oh, this is a big day for you, but it's also a bigger day for me. I think having that was like, it was really grateful to get through grad school, because it's like, I think you're already comparing yourself to other students, but to have that support system where we weren't, like even now, like I'm on the job market with like, a couple of them are other of my friends, but I'm like forwarding them like job ads that we're probably both going to apply to, but it's having, and I think like, that all just like carries on. I'm also really grateful for my family. I know that, so my parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and they don't really understand like what I do, or like, what my career really looks like, especially when I talk about research. When I talk about teaching, they like can get a grasp of that. But like, regardless, like they've always been like super supportive. Like, every like accomplishment I've had, they're always like really proud of. And I think having that support, like even though they don't fully understand it, but like kind of like supporting me regardless, has been really, I'm just like, yeah, really grateful for.
I think that was beautifully said. All right, Michelle, the final question is, what is one rule you would want everyone to follow?
I think the one rule that would be helpful for everyone to follow is to, and I think I kind of follow this, is like to just be kind. I know we all come from like different perspectives and have different like identities, and but I think if we are kind to one another and are like open with one another, I think we're all going through different things, especially like like the past year or so have been really rough, and so to just like be kind to one another. And so I think that is the rule that I think would be helpful for everyone to follow.
And I think that's a perfect rule. So, well, Michelle, I just want to say thank you so much again for joining me today. This has been a wonderful conversation. Before we end, is there anything that you would like to end on? Any new projects or just any final words you'd like to say?
No, I just want to thank you, Aubrey. This has been really, really great. And I'm so excited to see future podcasts that you do. All the ones that you've done so far have been really amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a conversation with Dr. Michelle Pasco. Thank you guys so much. If you're interested in contacting today's guest, you can contact Michelle at mcpasco@asu.edu. Thank you.
Connect with us and get access to all of our podcasts by visiting thesanfordschool.asu.edu/podcast, where you will also find links to all of our social media channels. This conversation has come to an end, but our work here continues.